The Bronze and Iron Age cultures in Poland are known mainly from archaeological research. Early Bronze Age cultures in Poland began around 2300–400 BCE, while the Iron Age commenced in approximately 700–750 BCE. The Iron Age archaeological cultures no longer existed by the start of the Common Era. The subject of the ethnicity and linguistic affiliation of the groups living in Central and Eastern Europe at the time is, given the absence of written records, speculative, and accordingly there is considerable disagreement. In Poland, the Lusatian culture, spanning both the Bronze and Iron Ages, became particularly prominent. The most famous archaeological finding from that period is the Biskup and fortified settlement on the lake from which it takes its name, representing the Lusatian culture of the early Iron Age. The Bronze Age in Poland consisted of period I 2300 to 1600 BC, period II 1600 to 1350 BC, period III 1350 to 1100 BC, period IV 1100 to 900 BC, period V 900 to 700 BC. The early Iron Age included Halstead period c. 700 to 600 BC, and Halstead period d. 600 to 450 BC. Bronze items present in Poland around 2300 BC were brought from the Carpathian Basin. The native early Bronze Age that followed was dominated by the innovative Lusatian culture in western Poland, and by the conservative Mieszanowicze culture in the east. Those were replaced in the respective territories, for the duration of the second, the older Bronze period, by the Tumulus culture and the Trzciniec culture. Characteristic of the remaining Bronze periods were the urnfield cultures. Within the range, skeletal burials had been replaced by cremation of bodies throughout much of Europe. In Poland, the Lusatian culture settlements dominated the landscape for nearly 1,000 years, continuing into and including the early Iron Age. A series of Scythian invasions, beginning in the 6th century BC, precipitated the demise of the Lusatian culture. The Halstead period D was the time of expansion of the Pomeranian culture, while the Western Baltic Kurgans culture occupied the Mashuria-Warmia region of contemporary Poland. Unnetters and other Bronze Age cultures. Unnetters culture. The Bronze Age in Poland, as well as elsewhere in Central Europe, begins with the innovative Unnetters culture, in existence in Silesia and a part of Greater Poland during the first period of this era, that is from before 2200 to 1600 BC. This settled agricultural society's origins consisted of the conservative traditions inherited from the corded-ware populations and dynamic elements of the Belgica people. Significantly, the Unnetters people cultivated contacts with the highly developed cultures of the Carpathian Basin, through whom they had trade links with the cultures of early Greece. The culture era also echoed inspiring influence coming all the way from the most highly developed at the time civilizations of the Middle East. Characteristic of the Unnetters societies was greater general affluence and developed social stratification, compared with late Neolithic cultures. Objects made of bronze, often of luxurious or prestigious nature, were in high demand as symbols of power and importance and are typically found in the graves of princes. 14 such burial sites, circular mounds of earth heaped up on top of wooden, clay and stone structures, some as large as 30 meters in diameter, were found in Leki Male near Grodzisk Wielkopolski, erected 2000 to 1800 BC, suggesting the existence of a local dynasty. Proliferation of locally made bronze items far from the centers of ore mining. A bronze craftsmanship shows that the elites were able to control the trade routes, which involved also the transportation of amber from the Baltic Sea shores to Aegean Sea area artisans. Many concealed bronze treasures have been found, including a fine one from Pilschitz near Glubčice. Stylistically refined Aotearoa ceramics show inspiration from the Achaean vessels obtained through trade. Fortified settlements were built, one actively researched site that was utilized and went through a number of phases during the 2000 to 1500 BC period, is in Brushetevor in Koshan County. Remains of settlements and cemeteries were discovered around Wrocław and elsewhere in Lower Silesia, including an amber processing workshop in Nowy County. The nature of the weapons and other items found at Untitled sites suggests a chronic state of warfare and the emergence of a warrior class, at the forefront of civilization in its time and place. The Untitled culture eventually succumbed to social and economic deterioration. Its demise may have been hastened by destructive raids waged by the warriors of the belligerent burial mound culture, which in the end replaced it. IWNO culture. The IWNO culture, named after IWNO near Zuben, was a contemporary of the Untitled culture, located in Kujawi, eastern Pomerania and northeastern Greater Poland. It was influenced by the Untitled culture, from where the bronze items were imported, and had many common traits with the Mieszanowice culture. IWNO thin-walled clay vessels were carefully finished and domestic animal raising was important for the economy. Plonia group. The Plonia group of a comparable period, named after a neighborhood of Szczecin, extended over central and western Polish Pomerania. It is known for stone-chest burials. Mieszanowice culture, east of the Untitled culture in Lesser Poland and further north to the Masovia region, during roughly the same span of time, lay the territory of the Mieszanowice culture, named after the type site village near Opatów. These people, culturally also descendants of the corded ware culture, at first lived as mobile cattle breeders, but around 2200 BC started building permanent settlements and engaged in agriculture as well. Mieszanowice culture was a conservative society, frequently still using stone tools and reserving copper for decorations. The Pleso group of the Mieszanowice culture originated the most significant of the Polish Bronze Age fortified settlements, located in Trzynica near Jasło. It was constructed on a particularly suitable, elevated natural location, with the initial enclosed area of 0.6 hectares. It remained in continuous use from about 2100 to 1300 BC and is often dubbed the Carpathian Troy of the Troy of the North. The area has been a site of archaeological explorations for the past 100 years, but only the more recent investigations uncovered its true significance in terms of the understanding of the early Bronze Age developments in Central Europe. 30,000 Pleso group artifacts have been unearthed, including exceptionally well-made ornamented pottery and weaving equipment. Some of the objects recovered, as well as the nature of the defensive structures, reveal the Pleso group's contacts with the Carpathian Basin peoples and the resulting influence coming from the cultures. Strzezo culture, of the same cultural sphere as Mieszanowice. Still further east was the Strzezo culture, named after the village near Rubizo. Otomani Fusas-Arboni culture. Highly advanced Otomani Fusas-Arboni culture people arrived in Trzynica area around 1650 BC, coming from the regions south of the Carpathian Mountains, and took over the settlement developed earlier by the Pleso group. as they were settling the Wisloka River drainage area. They assimilated the local population and created a more powerful stronghold by rebuilding and expanding with remarkable engineering ingenuity the existing structure. The Ottomani people left over 60,000 identified relics, many of which are a manifestation of the close ties with the Mediterranean area cultures, whence the Troy connection. The Trasinica fortress was burned, rebuilt and expanded again, and after 1350 BC abandoned for over 2,000 years. The settlement was repopulated by the Slavs who around 770–780 CE built a massive gourd here. The above cultures constitute the first period of the Bronze Age in Poland, California, 2300 to 1600 BC. Trzyniec culture. Throughout the range and beyond, the Mierzanovice and Strizo cultures were replaced by the Trzyniec culture. It was named after Trzyniec near Puławy and lasted from 1700 to 1100 BC, that is, throughout the second and third periods of the Bronze Age. It was probably made up of diverse post-Neolithic populations, whose common characteristic was the type of pottery, large vessels with a thickened upper edge and a horizontal decorative protrusion around the neck. First found around northern Germany at the beginning of the millennium, their own production of bronze objects came late and only in the western part of this culture's range. A kurgan burial site of the Trzyniec culture in use from the 15th to the early 12th century BC was preserved in Dachau near Sandomierz. The central bottom part of the structure consists of two adjacent rectangular stone burial chambers with wooden floors. The larger one contains the bones of several women and children, the smaller one the cremated remains of one older man. Clay pots and copper decorations were also present. The chambers were covered by wooden constructions supporting stone slanting walls, roofs, the whole structure being covered by a large earth mound. In addition to this oldest part, the main burial of an apparent tribal chief and his family, there are newer peripheral graves at the edge of the kurgan and items indicating a prolonged cemetery and local cult use of this burial complex. Small-scale and sparse settlement areas with more primitive crafts were thought to be characteristic of the Trzyniec culture era period and distribution. However, a comprehensive, long-functioning, well-developed complex has been found near Polsey, Łódź County, with objects carbon-dated from 1530 to 1210 BC. The utilized living space, a complete microcosm, had the area of 17 hectares bordered by two streams, with fields, animal quarters and workshops. Cattle and pigs were kept, while the farmers cultivated oats, wheat and barley and caused devastation of the natural environment surroundings. Skeletons examined indicate that many residents suffered from tooth decay. Among the many thousand stone remnants discovered there are ceremonial staffs with a wooden handle, indicating influence from the distant Mesopotamia and the East in general. Melting and processing of bronze took place and salt was imported from regions further south. The main identified burial site was actively and repeatedly utilized for generations, bodies rearranged, the grave dug in the ground being covered by a mound 5 meters in diameter. Tumulus culture. Proto-Lusatian tumulus, a burial mound culture of Danubian origin, thrived in western Polish lands during the 1700 to 1400 BC period, and contributed to the birth and rise of the Urnfield cultures. Around 1400 BC it was replaced by the most important of them, the Lusatian culture. Burial mound culture again was a complex of cultures, which replaced the Untitled culture and had an earth and stone mound grave as the common trait. The burials are skeletal, as opposed to the cremation practices of the later Untitled cultures. There are no substantial settlements left by the burial mound people, whose agricultural practices were apparently limited mostly to animal husbandry. They developed bronze metallurgy to a large extent, satisfying their own needs for weapons and richly designed and executed decorations. The dominant social class were the warriors, who were equal and were the only men entitled to a tumulus burial. Pillarni culture. The Pillarni culture of Hungary and Slovakia, and also southern Lesser Poland, where like others they left bronze treasures, is an early example of the Untitled cultures. These cultures' burial customs involved cremation of bodies and placing the ashes in urns. The urns were buried without a mound, sometimes forming huge cemeteries with thousands of such graves. Lusatian culture of the later Bronze Age. General characteristics. The Lusatian culture lasted on Polish lands from 1450 to 250 BC, through the remainder of the Bronze Age and then into the Iron Age from 750 BC on. Although archaeologically it presents itself in a fairly uniform way, it is believed to have been ethnically non-homogeneous, originating in the interplay between groups arriving from outside and populations in existence in Poland, in which new cultural patterns were adopted. The East-West cultural disparity continued. For example, the use of metal objects was less common in the eastern regions, while in the western zone besides the urns the burials contained often many other vessels. The western zone ceramics of the early Lusatian period had very prominent protuberances around the lower part of the container. These regional differences became even more pronounced with time. A number of smaller Lusatian subcultures are distinguished, such as the one in Upper Silesia, where after a 250-year hiatus, beginning at about 900 BC, atypically for the Untitled cultural sphere, skeletal burials are found again. Settlements, economic activities, crafts and social organization. Bronze Age Lusatian rural settlements were limited to low-lying areas and until late in this period lacked fortifications or other defensive measures. During these more peaceful times, protection was not as essential as in the centuries to follow. The houses were made of beams insulated by clay moss, supported by poles, with slanting roofs covered by straw. Inside there were hearths, stools, beds, places for economic activity such as metallurgical production shops, vertical looms and hand-operated mills. Some livestock were also kept inside, and some were culled before winter because of insufficient ability to store feed. The materials used were still wood, horn and bone, and, especially in the eastern zone, stone. Women were commonly engaged in spinning and weaving. The clay weaving implements and workshops were found within the unearthed settlements. Pottery was still produced without the potter's wheel, and kilns specialized for baking pots were just making their first appearance. During the late Bronze Age, specialized centers manufactured beautifully painted ceramics, much of it for sale. Bronze metallurgy and craftsmanship became also highly developed and acquired locally different styles. Luxurious decorative items, tools and arms were made around Legnica and elsewhere in western and southern Poland. Lusatian social organization was based on the family and extended family, although early tribal communities may have also been developing. Social, professional and trade groups were gradually forming, including warriors, priests and metallurgists, but there is no evidence of a hereditary ruling class or other social elites. Lusatian settlements in central Poland were small and short-lived, no more than half a century at the same location, probably because the soil was no longer usable after intensive exploitation through a couple of generations. The exception is a huge settlement in Kowalewice, Zagierz County, from the Late Bronze Age, lasting into the Halstead period. A treasure of unique in Poland bronze and iron personal ornaments dated 8th century BC, stylistically related to finds from northern as well as southern Europe, was discovered on the edge of a settlement in Aleksandrowice, Kraków County, an area of extensive Lusatian settlement activity. Solar cult and cult-related art. Many objects recovered by archaeologists are believed to be related to a cult of the sun and the solar deity. Those include ceramics with painted solar images and molded into bird figures, bronze-wheeled mini-carts with animal ornaments and bronze clasps with bird images, probably worn as parts of a ceremonial robe by priest-sorcerers, anthropomorphic figurines and zoomorphic containers and plates related to solar or other forms of cult are found in the Lusatian Western Zone. They come from the last centuries of the Bronze Age and continue into the Iron Age. Engraved on a vase urn found in Lazy in Milledge County and dated 850–650 BCE representations of mythical deer-man figures. Some such vessels, jewelry and drawings have the contemporary counterparts in Assyria, ancient Israel, archaic Greece and Etruria, which shows the breadth of Lusatian trade and other contacts. A panpipe, a musical instrument of the type popular in northern Italy and eastern Halstead circles, was found in a grave in Przyjaźń near Zawiacy from the Late Bronze or Early Iron periods. Lusatian culture of the Early Iron Age. Changing conditions and regional relations. Several factors destabilized the situation at the outset of the Iron Age. Climate cooling caused a degradation of the Asian steppes, which forced the nomadic people who lived there to move out and started a chain of consequences. Horsemen from the steppe armed with iron weapons were able to penetrate large areas of Europe. The Europeans responded by building large fortified settlements, adopting the warring methods of the Asian invaders, developing a specialized military caste and a strong power system based on a prince-ruler. The Halstead culture, which developed west and south of Poland, itself imitating the Mediterranean civilizations and cultivating close contacts with them, turned out to be a major influence on the Lusatian people on Polish lands, whose culture reached its peak during the 750–550 BC period. Baltic amber was traded in return for weapons and luxurious objects from southern Europe, including fancy personal grooming items such as nail-clipping devices, and trade relations with the Nordic area peoples were similarly well developed, notably in western Pomerania, which had increasingly been falling under the Nordic cultural zone influence throughout the later Bronze Age, when its artisans imitated the Nordic imports. Lusatian culture of the Halstead periods. The Lusatian culture of the Halstead periods included most lands of present-day Poland, including the related Bialowice culture in some of the westernmost parts, contemporaneous with Halstead C&D and later and credited with the passing of a cyst grave type to the Pomeranian culture. Western Poland was more highly developed, with local manufacturing, jewelry and other decorative products made of iron, bronze, glass, amber and other materials, as well as luxurious painted ceramics were patterned after the Halstead craft. In many graveyards the dead were buried in wooden chambers. The burials found in Gorszowice in Greater Poland are supplied with fancy equipment and resemble the graves of the Halstead tribal chiefs. Similarly, there are other treasures of luxurious and prestigious objects. Large-scale excavation of Lusatian settlements influenced by the alpine region of the Halstead culture took place in Wrocław County. The Artisans, Lezo and Miljevice parts of the settlements are separated from the rest by a solid palisade fence, possibly enclosing the dwellings of the emerging local elite. At the Noe Lezo settlement, a residential and industrial zones could be clearly distinguished, the latter one including kilns for pottery baking and smelting furnaces for ironworks. An acropolis in Domaslaw functioned from 1300 to 400 BC. In over 3,000 graves have been discovered there. Over 80 Halstead-type rich burials are among them. Objects recovered point to extensive trading contacts with the south of the Alps and Mediterranean regions. Because of the evidence acquired, some investigators now believe that the large center in Wrocław County and other early Iron Age settlements in Lower Silesia represent the Halstead, rather than Lusatian culture. Despite this apparent fascination with the lifestyles of the Western elites, the Lusatian people never acquired a comparable level of social stratification, and there were no hereditary princes. Economic activities. Agricultural activities remained the mainstay of the economy, supplemented as before by hunting and gathering. Simple wooden scratch plows were already used, pulled by oxen. Millet, wheat, rye, oats and barley were grown in field systems, while in the gardens bean and lentil were cultivated, as well as oil-producing poppy, turnips and flax, whose fiber made linen thread. Animal husbandry methods improved when iron utensils became more common, that is, beginning in the 6th century BC. Horses were bred and utilized more often, in addition to the traditionally kept cattle, swine, sheep and goats, and improved feed storage allowed keeping the herds throughout the winter season. Salt springs were used for salt production. In Wieliczka area in particular, salt was being manufactured already during the Bronze Age, with large-scale extraction taking place during the Halstead periods. In southern Poland, the Lusatians tried to exploit the locally available metal ores. Construction of fortified settlements and Scythian invasions. Beginning around 900 BC, the Lusatian people gradually fortified the settlements, first in the Silesia region. By 650–600 BC there were quite a few of them there and all over the western zone. Often built in locations naturally easy to defend, they were surrounded by walls made of earth, stone and wood, and moats, and could cover anywhere from 0.5 to 20 hectares. Smaller strongholds were built at strategic locations such as mountain passes and trade routes, where the residents could control and police the area. The strongholds also functioned as industrial centers. A good example of a trade manufacturing fortified settlement is the one in Komorów, located near the Gorszowice cemetery. Some of the large fortified areas didn't have many structures inside and served probably as temporary sanctuaries for the local population at times of danger. Beginning in the 6th century, several waves of Scythian invasions went through the Polish lands. The routes they traveled can be seen from the trail of the burnt-out Lusatian settlements they left. Dramatic material testimony of violent death and destruction was found among the ashes of a perished fortified settlement in Wycina near Nowogrod, Bobrząski. On the other hand, a golden Scythian treasure was discovered near a Lusatian settlement in Witaszkowo near Guben. Elements of arms and decorations patterned after zoomorphic Greek art motifs and dated 550 BC. Probably booty seized from a fallen Scythian chief. Biskupen of a different and far less common type is the famous, very well preserved Biskupen wooden stronghold on the lake, in use from about 750 to 500 BC, when rising water levels forced the inhabitants to abandon the settlement. The houses inside the walls were densely and regularly arranged in long rows. There were 11 parallel streets covered by wood. The whole structure is seen by some as a proto-urban imitation of the Mediterranean cities, but the dwellings were all alike, indicating a lack of significant social distinction within the Lusatian community. This site, central to Polish archaeology, has been under active and intense research since 1934. The descendants of the Biskupen residents, like of most Lusatian people, were very likely incorporated into the Pomeranian culture, and with it eventually into the Germanic mainstream. Decline of the Lusatian culture. In the 5th century the Lusatians stopped building fortified settlements. The Scythian expansion severed the trade links with the Halstead societies, while climatic changes damaged their agriculture. All this forced them to disperse and caused disintegration of the social structures. Less developed population from the eastern zone migrated west. Highly developed ceramic and metallurgic industries waned. The Pomeranian culture expanded into the previously Lusatian areas. By the 4th century BC the Lusatian culture was for the most part gone, with the last small populations surviving in western and southern Poland.